It hurts when I sit. The phrase was so faint it nearly vanished into the classroom's murmur, but Marco heard it. He froze, marker still in hand, halfway between the blackboard and his desk. His gaze slowly shifted toward the back of the room, where Lucia Moreno sat. 10 years old, the quietest of them all. Always upright, back stiff, hands on the desk as if waiting for an order that never came. Sometimes signs don't scream, they barely whisper. But if you don't listen, you can lose everything. Before continuing with this story, make sure to support us with a like and subscribe to the channel. We tell real, important stories, and every bit of your support helps us keep sharing them. Now, pay attention. That day, the 4-degree classroom of Santa Clara Municipal Elementary School unfolded like any other Tuesday. Marco Ruiz, a teacher for more than 12 years, was going over a lesson on vertebrate animals. He had scribbled some examples on the board and dictated instructions in his usual tone, calm, clear, patient. But something had been bothering him for days, a discomfort hard to name. Lucia. She wasn't a problematic student. In fact, she was so quiet she sometimes seemed to blend into the walls. She didn't interrupt, didn't get distracted, didn't misbehave. But Marco had started noticing little details. How she avoided sitting fully on the chair, how she tucked one leg under her thigh to lean slightly to the side, how she held her breath whenever someone passed near her desk. That morning, while the children copied from the board, he walked around the classroom as usual. Passing by Lucia, he noticed her face was pale, her brow furrowed. He thought of a fever, maybe an infection. He leaned toward her. "Are you okay, Lucia?" She didn't reply. She only lowered her gaze. "If you're not feeling well, you can tell me," Marco insisted softly. That was when she, without looking at him, whispered, "It hurts when I sit." He felt a void in his stomach. Something in her tone, not the phrase itself, but how she said it, made his skin crawl. It wasn't a complaint like, "My back hurts" or "My legs hurt." No, it was something else, more serious, more restrained, more learned. Marco crouched slightly. "Where exactly does it hurt?" Lucia shrugged, but her eyes immediately filled with tears. She didn't cry. She just pressed her lips together and looked away. "Did you fall? Did someone push you?" She shook her head slowly. Marco didn't want to insist in front of the others. He straightened up, gently asked her to take a deep breath, and continued the lesson. But he could no longer concentrate. The rest of the day he spent observing, measuring each gesture, each reaction. Lucia didn't participate in any physical activity. During recess, while the others played, she sat alone on the edge of the yard's wall, motionless. That night, Marco couldn't sleep. He went over all the possibilities in his mind: a fall, a coccyx injury, a medical problem, but something didn't fit. It wasn't just the pain, it was the fear. The way she curled in on herself, as if trying to disappear, and how she avoided contact with adults, even with him. At midnight, he got out of bed, made some tea, and sat down at his computer. He logged into the school's internal system, looked up Lucia Moreno's file. Family. Both parents present, both listed as guardians. No serious academic history. But he noticed something. She had changed schools 3 times in the last 2 years. He opened a new tab, looked up the personal number of the principal, Sylvia Garcia. It wasn't the first time he worried about a student, but this time felt different, urgent. At 7:02 a.m., phone already in hand, Marco decided. He took a deep breath, dialed, and when Sylvia answered, still groggy, he said only one sentence. "I need to talk to you about a student. It's important." Sylvia Garcia didn't take long to arrive. Dressed in her usual formal attire, straight skirt, white blouse, hair in a tight bun. A thermos of coffee in one hand, cell phone in the other. As soon as she entered the office, she shut the door behind her and sat across from Marco. "What happened?" Marco recounted what had happened with precision. He didn't exaggerate, but he didn't soften the details either. He told her about Lucia's behavior, her body language, the phrase. Sylvia listened without interrupting, but her expression visibly shifted with each word. When he finished, she lowered her eyes for a moment, thoughtful. "Do you have proof?" she finally asked, her voice low, more out of protocol than distrust. "Only what I saw," Marco replied, "and what I felt. But something isn't right, Sylvia. I know it. I've worked with hundreds of kids, and this isn't an exaggeration. Sylvia nodded. She opened a notebook, jotted some notes, then picked up the office phone. I'm going to call Child Protective Services. They need to come today. What if I'm wrong? And what if you're not? She answered without hesitation. By mid-morning, a social worker arrived at the school. Her name was Elena Vargas, a woman in her 40s with a calm face and steady voice. Marco repeated what had happened. Elena took notes and asked to see Lucia in private. Lucia was taken to a small counseling room. Elena offered her some juice, sat across from her with a closed notebook in her lap. Lucia, you don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to. But if something makes you uncomfortable, if something is hurting you, you can tell me. I'm here to help you. No one is going to punish you. No one is going to force you. The girl lowered her gaze and said nothing. For more than 10 minutes, Elena tried to approach her gently. But Lucia didn't open up. Only once did she murmur, "My dad says you don't talk about what happens at home." And that was enough. "And what if you're not?" she replied without hesitation. By mid-morning, a social worker had arrived at the school. Her name was Elena Vargas, a woman in her 40s, with a calm face and a steady voice. Marco went over everything that had happened. Elena took notes and then asked to see Lucia in private. Lucia was taken to a small counseling room. Elena offered her some juice, then sat across from her with a closed notebook resting on her lap. "Lucia, you don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to. But if something makes you uncomfortable, if something is hurting you, you can tell me. I'm here to help you. No one will punish you. No one will force you." The girl lowered her gaze and said nothing. For more than 10 minutes, Elena tried to reach her gently. But Lucia didn't open up. Only once did she murmur, "My dad says you don't talk about what happens at home." And that was enough. The school psychologist was called in as well. Meanwhile, Sylvia and Elena discussed the protocol. It was decided to contact the parents immediately and summon them for a formal meeting that same afternoon. At 4:40 p.m., they arrived. First the mother, Raquel Herrera, thin, pale-faced with nervous eyes. Then, 5 minutes later, the father, Juan Moreno, tall, broad-shouldered, with a stern expression. He wore a leather jacket, sunglasses dangling from his collar. He greeted them half-heartedly and sat down at once, without waiting to be asked. Sylvia cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming. We've noticed some concerning behaviors in Lucia, and we'd like to discuss them with you." Juan laughed with disdain. "And now what? She didn't like the cafeteria food? Or maybe she doesn't get along with her little friends." Raquel, on the other hand, remained silent. Her hands stayed clasped, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Your daughter reported pain when sitting, and certain behaviors," Elena added carefully, "that suggest possible emotional distress." Juan leaned slightly forward. "And what exactly are you trying to imply?" "We're not implying anything," Sylvia said calmly. "We only want to make sure Lucia is all right." He drummed his fingers lightly on the table. "And you people think you can understand what goes on in a home just by looking at a child for a couple of hours a day? What do you know about families, about being a parent?" Raquel made an attempt to speak, but he shot her a look that froze her in place. At that moment, Lucia walked into the office, accompanied by an aide. The moment she saw her father, her body tensed visibly. She instinctively stepped back. From the doorway, Marco saw the terror in her eyes. Juan smiled. "Hello, Princess." Lucia didn't respond. Elena stood. "Mr. Moreno, we're going to ask you to wait outside for a few minutes. We'd like to speak with Lucia a little more." Juan didn't move. "What for? What's she going to make up now?" "We're asking you, please," Sylvia interjected. Finally, he left, muttering under his breath. The moment the door closed, Lucia broke into tears. It wasn't an outburst. It was contained, silent, like the cry of someone who doesn't cry often and has forgotten how. Elena knelt down in front of her. She didn't ask her to talk. She just waited. Lucia took a deep breath and said a sentence no one in that office would ever forget. "He told me that if I speak, I'll never see my mom again." Elena remained calm. She pulled a tissue from her bag, handed it to Lucia without pressing her, then turned toward Sylvia with a quick, almost imperceptible glance, but one loaded with resolve. From the hallway, Marco hadn't heard the girl's words, but he saw Elena's face harden in an instant. Something had just shifted. Inside the office, Lucia was no longer speaking, but her silence had revealed everything that needed to be known. The school staff, with the support of the social worker, decided to activate the immediate intervention protocol. The police were notified. While waiting for the officers, Sylvia requested that the parents be held in separate rooms. Juan Moreno did not take it well. "And what do you think you're doing? I want to see my daughter." "Sir, we're asking for your cooperation," said one of the teachers present at the meeting. "It will only be a few minutes." Juan shot to his feet, shoving the chair so hard it toppled to the ground. The aide stepped back, and one of the school guards was already dialing on his phone. Juan stopped, breathing heavily. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Yes, we do," Sylvia replied, "and we will not stay silent." The mother, Raquel, did not intervene, but something in her expression shifted. Her face was still pale, yet she no longer avoided anyone's gaze. She didn't seem surprised, only resigned. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived, Sub-Inspector Laura Medina and Officer Victor Suarez. They entered without raising their voices, introduced themselves formally, and asked to speak with each adult separately. Lucia was taken away by Elena to a safe room in the counseling wing. The first interview was with Raquel. For the first few minutes, she denied knowing anything. She spoke softly, as if afraid her husband could hear her from anywhere in the building. But slowly, her defenses cracked. Her hands trembled on her knees. She finally said, "He's always been very strict, very controlling. Sometimes he goes too far, but he says it's for Lucia's own good." "What do you mean by goes too far?" Laura asked. Raquel pressed her lips together. "He told me not to say anything. He said it was family business, that if anyone asked, I had to say everything was fine." "And do you think everything is fine?" Silence. "Lucia is in danger, Mrs. Herrera. We need you to be clear." Raquel closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then she said it. "I've heard things, at night. Sometimes," she cried, "but he told her to be quiet, or it would be worse. Once I saw bruises on her, but she said she fell. Another time she told me she didn't want to be left alone with him." Meanwhile, outside the room, Officer Suarez was questioning Juan. "What's your relationship like with your daughter?" "Excellent. I raise her the way she should be raised, not like those spoiled little brats you see today. Sometimes you have to teach discipline, don't you?" "Do you hit your daughter?" Juan smirked. "Since when is parenting a crime? And what about the pain she reported when sitting?" "That girl lies. Someone's putting strange ideas in her head. Who was it? That teacher with the hero complex? Have you ever left her alone with you for long periods? And if I did, she's my daughter." Juan leaned forward. His tone dropped, lower, colder. "You know what I think? You people get bored and need to invent monsters to feel important. But there's no monster here, just a father who knows how to set things straight." But just then, Suarez received a call from Laura's room. The information was clear. There was enough evidence to act. Juan Moreno was arrested on the spot. When he heard the order, he leapt up in fury, shouting that it was an injustice, that he would sue them all. Students in the building overheard the commotion. Some teachers stepped out of their classrooms, others shut their doors. Juan was handcuffed and escorted out of the school. Raquel did not cry. She didn't smile either. She simply asked, "Is my daughter all right?" Elena reassured her, told her that Lucia was safe. That night, at the Central Precinct, a restraining order was issued. Lucia was taken to a medical facility for a full examination. The prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation. And in the principal's office, now empty, Marco sat alone at his desk, his head in his hands. It had all begun with a single phrase, a phrase that had almost gone unnoticed. The Children's Medical Center had walls painted in soft colors. Drawings of animals hung in the hallways, and the nurses spoke in hushed tones, as if silence itself could help heal. There, in a room reserved for victims of violence, Lucia sat on the examination table, her feet dangling, not touching the floor. She wore a blanket draped over her shoulders, though she wasn't cold. The doctor attending her, a pediatrician specializing in trauma, spoke carefully, explaining each step before proceeding. Lucia did not cry, but her eyes still carried that constant alertness, the look of someone who has learned not to trust anyone too quickly. "You're safe now," the doctor told her, voice firm yet gentle. "No one is going to hurt you here." The examination was thorough. The marks spoke for themselves: recent bruises, older ones, physical signs, some consistent with falls, others that only silence could explain. Everything was documented. The medical report was sent to the prosecutor's office that same night. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Juan Moreno remained in custody. He said little, only asked for his phone call and repeated that this was all a setup. What he didn't know was that this wasn't the first time someone had raised concerns about his home. Officer Suarez, combing through records, found an informal report from 2 years earlier. A neighbor had claimed to hear a child crying on several consecutive nights, but at the time, no formal complaint was filed. The case wasn't investigated. The neighbor moved away months later. In addition, when officials reviewed Lucia's previous school records, they discovered she had been withdrawn abruptly, with no explanation. When they called the institution, a former teacher recalled having sent a note raising concerns about possible neglect. But no one ever responded. Now, with the weight of the medical evidence, the mother's testimony, and the observations from the school staff, the case was solid. Temporary custody of Lucia was granted to the state, with ongoing psychological and medical care. Raquel, the mother, asked to see her. Elena, the social worker, allowed it under supervision. The scene was simple. Lucia entered the room, stopped a few steps away, looked at her mother, and said nothing. Raquel didn't speak either. She only opened her arms. Lucia didn't run. She walked, slowly, cautiously. But once she reached her, she allowed herself to be embraced. Raquel wrapped her tightly, trembling. "I'm sorry," Raquel whispered over and over. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." They stayed like that for several minutes. Days later, Marco received a call from Elena. "I wanted you to know," she said. "The girl is out of danger. We've transferred her to a special center, and she's receiving therapy. She's responding well." Marco closed his eyes when he heard this, not out of relief, but from contained rage. And him? Preventive detention. He's been charged with aggravated child abuse and assault. The prosecutor will ask for the maximum sentence. And the mother? She's cooperating. She has some responsibility too, but for now, her testimony is a priority. We don't know if she'll ever regain custody in the future. It will depend on many things. Thank you for telling me. Before hanging up, Elena added, "You know something? This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't listened to her." That phrase. Anyone else might have ignored it. Marco didn't reply, but for the first time in weeks, he took a deep breath and felt he had done the right thing. That same afternoon, at school, Sylvia convened an internal meeting. They decided to update the entire violence detection protocol. They organized workshops, wrote manuals on warning signs, training for all staff. Marco suggested one more thing: to listen more, always, even to what is not said. A few weeks later, Lucia sent a letter to the school. She wrote it with her therapist. Sylvia read it aloud through tears. "Thank you for taking care of me. Now, it doesn't hurt when I sit anymore." The weeks went by. Lucia remained under state custody, but no longer in a hospital. She had been transferred to a protected home for girls at risk. There, she had her own bed, books, colored pencils. She had safety. And for the first time in a long time, she had space to breathe. She attended therapy twice a week. The first sessions were difficult. She refused to speak. She only drew. Houses with closed windows, gray trees, small figures with large eyes. But little by little, guided by her psychologist, Lucia began to use words, to tell her story. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Justice continued its course. Juan Moreno was charged with multiple crimes: aggravated abuse, domestic violence, coercion. His record was reviewed thoroughly. More evidence emerged. The prosecutor requested preventive prison while the investigation lasted. Raquel, the mother, asked to enter the witness protection program. She also began therapy voluntarily. She testified about everything she knew. She cooperated. She said she had been a victim of manipulation, psychological control, and threats for years. Authorities were evaluating whether, with time and treatment, she could regain partial custody of her daughter. Meanwhile, at school, Marco returned to the classroom. He tried to maintain routine, lessons, recess, grading, but everything reminded him of Lucia, her empty chair, the corner where she always left her backpack, the notebook with small, neat handwriting. One day during an art activity, a student asked, "Teacher, is Lucia coming back?" Marco smiled sadly. I don't know, but wherever she is, I'm sure she's learning many new things. Weeks later, another letter arrived at the school. It was from Lucia, written in her own hand with big, slightly uneven but clear letters. It read, "Thank you for not ignoring me. Now I'm fine. It doesn't hurt when I sit anymore. I'm learning to trust." And to draw flowers. Sylvia framed the letter and hung it in the teacher's room. And a month later, at a special school activity, Lucia returned, not yet as a student, but as a visitor. She came accompanied by her social worker. She walked down the hallway slowly, recognizing every corner. When she entered Marco's classroom, all the children applauded. She smiled, for the first time, with her eyes. Marco offered her her usual chair. Lucia hesitated for a second. Then she took a deep breath and sat down, without pain, without fear. That gesture was more powerful than any word. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story touched you, please support us with a like and subscribe to the channel. We share real stories with respect and responsibility because we believe they can make a difference. And before you go, tell us, where are you watching us from? Write it in the comments. We love reading you.